It's good to be back.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, last time we talked a lot about media and how to sort of give proper defenses for yourself and for your children. And this is something that I feel like would be very useful to elaborate upon even more. There's so much value in there that we can take.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's now is the time more than ever, which is, so evergreen, right?
Yeah.
But now is the time more than ever we need to be defended against media.
Hmm.
And one of the things that you and I've talked about for a long time now is really one of our first kind of concepts when we were talking years ago. How much media should your family consume?
Hmm.
Should your family consume any media? We can look at different subcultures. In the US, we have, the Amish, but there are others out there that don't have any media. And what does
Hmm.
that look like? What are the pitfalls? And so I feel that we've arrived at a very good spot to actually give advice on that one. Having
Hmm.
tackled the issue more or less with ourselves, now being able to help other people walk through that process of how do you go about defending against media. This thing is all around you, it's in every single cultural aspect, and you can't walk from your house to the grocery store without some sort of media reference assaulting you out of nowhere.
Hmm.
How can you be defended, and how can your children be defended against that kind of an assault? So I think this is a perfect time for that.
Yeah, because people can obviously see the extreme example of, the Coco Melon kids that are just watching the most brain rotted content possible and seeing what that really does to children. Most people can see that, tablet kids are not necessarily great. And a lot of people would go to the idea of, oh, I'm just going to have them, watch the same kind of things that I watched. But that's also just going into you only have sort of a reference for what you personally have experienced. So you don't know what there is out there that is possible. In the same way of our take on the fourth episode of saying Lord of the Rings is mid,
Right.
it's that you have only the cultural reference for what you understand. It's the idea of he was not left England, does not know England. So the kind of way that people take things is that, oh, media is just very recently becoming corrupt, and that, oh, back in the good old days of 2012 things were
Mm-hmm.
so much better. But in reality, so many of the problems that happened recently and the problems that have happened for the past 50, 60 years have been from the poisoning that has happened through media from the start. And the natural conclusion of 2012 media is to go into 2025 media. There is a straight through line to where this is the necessary progression of that idea. So you look at people who have way too much media exposure, or media exposure in the way that most people classically do it, and you can obviously see the issues with that. And then you also look at, well, all right, people will look at, oh, there's all these problems with media. I'm just going to go full Mennonite, full Amish,
Mm-hmm.
have absolutely no media whatsoever. And there are many problems that also come with that. You can see so many people that are in very sheltered communities, sheltered lives, and the first time that they interact with the outside world, there's a massive rubber band effect to where they don't have the defenses, the tools, the shield to actually protect themselves against the weapons of the enemy. And so they just immediately get one shot by it and sort of bounce back to essentially the average, Portlanderite, or go way further into somebody that isn't what the intended goal would be. And so, in that sense, even if, even when you're in a position of, all right, media is poison, media is not good, and I don't want my children to be exposed to it, there is a very good case that we would bring up that there is importance in giving your children access to media in certain ways deliberately in order to give them the shield to know how to defend against the weapons that are being used against them. It's in an ideal world, no kid would ever have to learn any martial art or be able to defend themselves physically because they would never have somebody who's just, randomly picking fights. That's obviously the ideal world. But we live in a world where, you can just randomly get attacked on the street. And if you don't have the ability to defend yourself, Even though you might not want to have your children learn a martial art, it's still important just because of the reality of the world that we live in. You can't have a world in which there is absolutely no exposure to media, in that even if you aren't exposing your children to media, your children are getting exposed to people who have been exposed to media. And that is one of the vectors of attack that media uses, is the sort of social contagion aspect of it.
Yeah, absolutely. When you are talking about something that's so holistically involved in the culture on every single level, there's no real way, I would argue, to completely separate yourself from it. I grew up around a decent amount of Mennonites. And so for Mennonites, me watching them, these kids I'm growing up with, kind of go down different paths based on essentially when they got access to a cell phone
Mm-hmm.
and what kind of cell phone they had.
Mm-hmm.
So the Mennonite purist would kind of be like, oh yeah, so like cell phones are kind of the problem here. But the reality is that you can have all kinds of influence. And for those that don't know, Mennonites oftentimes do use cell phones and drive vehicles, but they largely keep other kinds of technology to a minimum in their houses. They have very specific dress codes and things like
Mm-hmm.
that. So they're not like the Amish explicitly. But when they first get access to the cell phones, you can see that that kind of exposure to being able to view the outside world. And then you mentioned a rubber banding effect. It happens so extreme, partly because they are under the impression that they live in a minority worldview. That is, they know we're Mennonites, we're different from everybody else. Not everybody else thinks like we do. So when they see media, they immediately assume, well, that's what everyone else in the world thinks like.
Mm-hmm.
And if you are a foreigner and you watch American films, you might be led to think that Americans are very, very promiscuous and that they have like no concerns about like the sanctity of marriage or anything like that. When the reality is that is still a pretty big taboo for a lot of Americans. The same happens with the Amish of thinking, or not the Amish, excuse me, the Mennonites in this case, thinking, oh, so that's what's okay in America, because they're essentially a foreigner in their own country. They don't know what's culturally acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And you see those kids just go from being fairly respectful to thinking, oh, I have all this backing from another culture that I can be a part of. And that culture they buy into is the culture of media. It's not actually what we would consider acceptable things. I think part of the address here has to be leveled towards the origin of media in terms of what it's actually doing.
Mm-hmm.
And what it is very realistically doing, which we touched a little bit on the live episode, it's controlling the language. If you, as a controller or as a person who wants to take control of a culture, you have to first grab a hold of the language and make sure that the words mean what you want them to mean,
Mm-hmm.
or that people naturally are going to use the phrases that you want them to use, so that they don't have an idea that there's an outside thought. So then jumping from the Mennonite, who's very much offline and then can be kind of rubber banded by just one little catalyst, whether that's a friend telling them about this thing or that thing, and then they're going looking for it or getting a phone or whatever. The other end of the spectrum is the chronically online or the chronically immersed in media, who from toddlerhood is watching Disney movies, and then like Disney graduates to MCU, still Disney, but you know, for a different portion, and then MCU into something else that's more adult centric or whatever, you know, Game of Thrones or something.
Yeah, like Severance would be the
yeah. That's a great example. So they're moving through these different stages of media. They think that that is what the world thinks.
Mhm.
They think this is the opinion of the world. And because their language is given to them through media, they don't have the ability to fight back.
Mhm.
And I use the terminology spell and counterspell here.
Mhm.
If you are fighting someone who is casting spells on you, but your entire vocabulary consists of the spells they're casting on you, you can only recast those spells on yourself.
Mhm.
And this is very relatable to the media concept of them programming your language.
Mhm.
And then when you use that language, you're reinforcing those thoughts on yourself. You can't escape. You have to get language or defense from somewhere else
Mhm.
to defend yourself. And that's where it's really important that we have the exposure to the media and understand what is the counterspell to that given specific media.
Yeah, absolutely. It's whenever you are exposed to certain languages or certain thought patterns in media, these are going to be things of this is every movie that you're given, every type of speech of, California Valley Girl, or, whatever character Dwayne The Rock Johnson plays,
Mhm.
or whatever Jason Statham is, or like a Rocky Balboa or something. Every time you're given a certain archetype in media, that is giving you a lens, a worldview, an archetype of thinking, a thought pattern for you to have. And if the only thought patterns that you have are the spells of the enemy, then you are uh, that's the only methods in which you can actually think. So, in one sense, that's why it's important to have wider variety of media in terms of classic books and stories and other things that are giving you a completely different perspective that is foreign to the outside world, so that you can look outside of it. This is a similar concept that you could think of in like a political space, in that there is a very particular in the not in the way that you have understood Overton window and that you have explained in a previous podcast, but the way that it's understood colloquially, in that here is the small view of acceptable thought. When you see so many people interact with ideas, they can only interact with them in the the left versus right, blue
Mhm.
versus red, these kind of very small ideas of what can be done. Whereas if I say something that would be considered super radical today, but on an overall timescale of the history of the world, regardless of how much of that you think is real, the idea of removing public school entirely. I'm not talking about, oh, we need to reform public school, or we need to get rid of the woke propaganda in this or
Right.
something. Just completely abolishing it. Like, that's such a foreign concept. That is an idea that uh, the average American man has no framing, no concept of even understanding of what that would even look like. Of, oh, like, we obviously need to have public school. There's no framing of understanding a world in which that is not something that is given. So introducing a framework of, oh, here's another way that things can be done, that's not just something that should be done for the concept of public school, but that needs to be done for the concept of essentially everything. Because there this is something of, I believe we talked about in the live episode, of every time there's some child who has some superpowers or something, like in the Incredibles or in Dragon Ball Z, they still go to school, they still
Yeah.
go to normal school, when obviously that would be something that, even if you weren't super against school, you wouldn't want to bring them in there. But when they do that, they emphasize the importance of school, that, oh, even though these people are super Saiyans, something, they are still. It is such an important part of the existence to live a normal life, that they need to be going to school. And that is just one example of a weapon that's constantly brought up in every single piece of media. Same thing with democracy being the ultimate good, or this thing or that thing being the ultimate bad. These are consistent spells that are being used, and if you don't have an introduction to other alternative ideas, then you're never going to have any way of thinking outside of that bubble.
Yeah, one of the really dangerous elements to just staying on the topic of like the education, one of the dangerous elements there is that when your children are watching these things, especially, they have an idea that, oh, I'm being deprived of something if, let's say, you're homeschooling. I've seen this happen to friends of mine where they're homeschooling their kids, and then the children around the ages 13, 14,
Mhm.
15, which we're talking about this age a lot, that kind of critical age between 14 and 17, for pretty much all children. We refer to that as the formative years, right? The years of the formation. And these are really important years. And I see kids go, Mom, Dad, why don't I get to go to public school?
Mhm.
Because they watch like Glory Road or something like that,
Mhm.
where even the best athletes got to go to school, got to get their grades up, got to go to
Yeah.
college, got to have the college experience. And in each of these movies, which like sport movies, when I say sports movies, I mean these documentaries or movies about, the basketball team or
Mhm.
the football team. It's always inside the framework of even the head coach being like, this is all so you can get a scholarship, and like, yeah,
Mhm.
maybe you'll play football in college, but it's so you can get a really good education.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's like, but if your goal is to play football, why would you need an education?
Mhm.
But the point is that the selling of this as being a natural good, something that just everybody needs, and in the story, it benefits so many of these people in ways that you actually don't see that happening in real life.
Mhm.
It leads these, kids who are homeschooled to ask those questions of, why don't I get to go to school? Why am I being deprived of all this awesome privilege? And then in some cases, I know some of these kids who get their wish and they go to public school, and talking to them after they graduate, and they're like, yeah, I really didn't like school.
Mhm.
But they
Yeah.
still have that in their mind that it was good that I went, though.
Mhm.
They don't know why it was good that they went. And so this is where it's important to be aware of the danger and to sort of counter it by, as a parent, if you are going to let your children watch those kind of movies, and like we say, it may be important that you show them one or two of these really influential movies of each type to kind of point out to them, hey, look, they're in this movie assuming some truth they don't define.
Mhm.
They're using, wizardry, if you will, to make you assume that the school is the ultimate good and dropping out would be the ultimate bad. And that is how you can help your children not feel like they're inadequate in this society
Mhm.
or that they are missing out on something, helping them
Mhm.
to understand that, no, actually, this is a really bad thing. And you need to understand when people are trying to manipulate you like they do in these movies.
Yeah, so in that sense, for you to get your child to understand why public schooling is not good and why this spell that they're trying to cast on you is meant to invoke certain feelings and get you to feel a certain way to manipulate you, you actually do have to expose them to that in order to get them to understand, okay, what is trying to be said, and then why is this the incorrect thing? And that's something that needs to be done for everything, because if you don't have um, the guided explanation towards why something is bad, then whenever they get exposed to the idea, and even if all they know is the truth, then they're exposed to this lie that they can't, debunk. In the same way of, if somebody grew up in a Christian household and all of a sudden they get exposed to the most basic garbage level one atheist arguments, and if the entire purpose of the Christian education that they've been gotten is just to give them good theology or to maybe make them be more reformed instead of Baptist, and that is where all of uh, the specific education has been funneled into, then whenever they get exposed to the most basic atheist argument, then it's really, really easy to convince them of that. Whereas if you explain to them and have them understand, oh, these are the current arguments and the current like tools that are being used to try to, deny Christ and to say that, we live in a rational materialist world. You have to understand what the rational materialist worldview is in order to understand why it is incorrect.
Yeah, I think that actually really ties in nicely with kind of the capstone of just the whole education point, which is that a lot of times these media franchises will try to push a sort of morality.
Mhm.
It's a moral thing to go to school. It's a moral thing to blah, 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 or to do whatever, to become a nurse or something like that. And if you are from a Christian worldview, you can get drawn in on this easier than someone who doesn't have that background.
Mhm.
Because if you are someone who moralizes, someone who considers their actions, whether they're moral or immoral before acting, then it can really cloud you to think, oh, well, the best thing for me is to go to school or to become a nurse because then I can help people
To do the
without,
moral thing.
right, to do the moral thing. If you fall for that, then if you're already a moral person, you're even more bought in on that system. But understanding the arguments against why that actually might not be a moral thing or why that is not healthy for you is really, really important. And so just talking about the idea that if you never get attacked or if you're never informed about how the enemy is going to attack you, you can really easily just be taken quickly. and fall for these kind of really low tier hanging fruits. And so in our society today, at large, at least in the Western world, morals are pushed as a really heavy weapon without any explanation as to why one moral is correct versus another. A lot of thought is given to individuality and to freedom as being obviously moral things. But if we look systemically at how society and culture functions, the individual has a responsibility to the whole, and that limits their freedom. So to be part of a society, you have to, in our current culture's imagination, be immoral because you do owe things to people around you. You're not a totally free individual. And this is just part of that understanding of the morality that they try to push on you. You don't owe anything to anybody is probably the biggest lie that we have heard and generally accepted in America. It's a very common American kind of expression of, I don't know, nothing to nobody. But the reality is you do owe something to somebody almost all of the time. And understanding that as a moral forefront changes how you're willing to be assaulted by other morals.
Yeah, in that sense, it's one of the most obvious things to sort of go into and kind of question is always looking at these sort of innate biases that are given to you and then question what really is the basis for this. One of the biggest morals that we're given in modern American society is the idea that freedom is the best ultimate good, of the ability to essentially do whatever you want, as long as it's, not hurting anybody. The kind of libertarian ideal is looked at as the ultimate good. But how really can that be justified, or like what is the actual basis for justification for that? And if you really kind of poke those holes or really try to question that, most people wouldn't have an answer for that. It's just something that is taken as a given because every single piece of media, every single thing that people hear about in school, in politics, in this and that, is all going towards that angle without ever actually having to take a first principles justification for why this should be the case.
Yeah, if freedom is a good thing, then it would by nature clash with other freedoms. This is why we have, as you just stated, that kind of idea of do whatever you want as long as you're not hurting someone else. But anyone who's lived very long in this world understands that everything you do affects everyone around you. So then what limits your freedom? What qualifies as hurting someone else? An emotional hurt or a situation in which their life is actually made worse? How do you qualify someone's living situation being made worse? There's all these different qualifiers then you have to go through. And like you're talking about in first principles, the first principle concept of freedom doesn't really exist except in super specific areas. So even if you look at, America's Constitution, there are freedoms that are protected. The reason they use freedoms plural is because it's not a concept, it's an object. A specific freedom, and then they're outlined. This specific freedom is defended. That specific freedom is defended. Understanding that the freedom itself is not the goal. There's other end goals that are there. Liberty is one of those, justice and liberty for all. Well, if you're going to take those words at the definite value, this is not possible because for one person to be justified or to have justice requires another person to be put in prison. So they're not at liberty, are they?
Yeah.
So you can't have liberty and justice for everyone. You can have justice for some and liberty for some. And this is a concept that is just one of those spells that's so ingrained in our society. We say this all the time. We go, oh yeah, everyone deserves liberty and justice. Well, you can't have both necessarily. And so that is why it has to be outlined so carefully. And because our media is built on the principles of this, or twisted the principles of this, it preaches the same message to us constantly. But you would never be able to defend against this if you weren't taught about it. If you go to other nations that are maybe undeveloped or underdeveloped, when you go there and Americans export democracy there, the people there have no defense against why the quite literally theology they're being fed is not good because they've never heard of such a thing. So they don't have the defenses. Goes back to, you need to equip yourself and your children with the defenses against these things. You don't have to know every single little bitty assault, but it should be clear how you need to defend against it and expose which lies are more insidious.
Yeah, and that's also it's kind of going a little bit back to the freedom point, is just the idea of you ultimately have a revealed hierarchy of values, revealed hierarchy of principles. And so if this is, a little bit more of like a current thing, and the zeitgeist is just the idea of, letting some person who's been convicted of, dozens of violent crimes back onto the street over and over and over and over again. Some people, libertarian minded people would take the idea of, give freedom, like rehabilitation or whatever. But at a certain point, you are depriving the you could even say the word freedom. You are depriving the freedom of every normal person to not have to live in a world where there are people that will just continually over and over and over again aggress onto others. So in that sense, even if it is depriving the liberty of some people, you still look at the value of what are you actually trying to control for. If you're in a society to where you are more aggressively punishing criminals, like this is always talked about with in standard history with medieval Europe, the idea that 1 to 2% of the population was executed every generation for violent crimes, and that sort of very heavily aggressively culled that sort of aggression out of the population, and also just made it to where these behaviors were not accepted and they were very harshly dealt with, and that led to more peaceful society for the 98% who don't do these insane things. So in that sense, that is a revealed preference of what is actually being cared about, of do you want to build society around caring for the rights of the exceptions, or do you want to build it around what would be best for everybody, as in the 98% who don't do random things?
Yeah, I think a really good litmus test in terms of understanding an idea and a concept that someone's going to posit to you, such as, well, don't you think everyone should be free? Is to understand the dichotomy of responsibility and authority. So the dichotomy is simply that you can't have one without the other. And this kind of is one of those parenting advice things that just applies to the whole world. If you give someone a task to accomplish, you have to give them the responsibility to accomplish it and then the authority to be in charge of the relevant aspects of it. So when you're looking at something like liberty or freedom and you want to say, oh, shouldn't everyone just be free? The real question is, to what end? What would be the end that we are granting freedom to? And the real answer is so that people have the authority to take care of the things they are responsible for. And so much of a society is about determining who has the responsibility and who has the authority. And so when you're structuring both your personal life, and if you were to say be in the position of structuring, I don't know, a country, you would want to look at this too. Who has the responsibility for what? Where does the responsibility fall? And does that person have the relevant authority to take care of the things that they are supposed to be responsible for? So in this case, we're talking about violent criminals doing violent criminal things. Who is responsible for them, essentially? Are they responsible for themselves? And if they are, then they have to be given authority to, take care of themselves. What happens when someone who has the authority is just misusing it? That person can't be allowed to continue. It's just not something that bodes well. And so the same thing is true down from the highest level to the lowest level, whether you run a company or whether you're someone who, just has a family.
Mhm.
When you give a task to somebody, you give them a responsibility, you have to also give them the requisite authority. And if they mismanage it, there has to be consequences for the mismanagement of the authority. And inside there is no real freedom per se,
Mhm.
because there's the responsibility and the authority. The freedom is kind of like an ethereal or existential concept of your own free will, which there's also a question of in the current thing, questioning whether free will exists at all, which is not a topic I really want to get into. But
Yeah.
it's just when you get further down the rabbit hole, you start to get into these weird little niches about that kind of silly thing.
Mhm. So going back into the responsibility and in terms of what your roles and responsibility are to the people around you, the concept of the family and how you introduce media. How would you, as a person with a family who has responsibility to them, how would you introduce a particular movie to your child or a particular piece of media? What would be the steps and progression of how you would give an example piece of media in practice for what we're talking about?
It's a really good question. I think a lot of it is in the priming and the prepping. We could take something to name names, such as the Bourne identity series legacy thing, right? It's a movie that has a bunch of different things that are going on in it,
Mhm.
and it's very culturally relevant. A lot of people will talk about it as kind of the birthplace of a lot of these spy thriller movies, right?
Mhm.
It really brought to the forefront some of these kind of cool niches that we see, like Jack Reacher and other things coming out of this concept. So to me, that's something I would want to maybe show and show the weakness or the strength thereof. So I think it comes with first priming uh, the family members that I want to expose to it with understanding what is the pretense the movie operates under.
Mhm.
The movie operates under the idea that there are all these intelligence agencies and they're all fighting for little bitty things, and news reporters are a huge threat to the CIA. And all these different concepts are underlying inside this specific franchise. And so priming them to understand and recognize, hey, when you see this thing, you're supposed to go, oh, yeah, a journalist threatening to expose a few pages of classified documents really scares the CIA.
Mhm.
That is a huge problem because it fundamentally misunderstands how the world is structured.
Mhm.
We talked about this, is either episode 3 or 2. I can't remember. There are no nations,
Mhm.
If it's fake, if one's fake, it's all fake.
Mhm.
So then why would a news agency, which is on the same team as any given intelligence agency,
Mhm.
have a problem with this? So for me, having watched the movie, understood the premise, and understood what I would consider the flaws to be, explaining those first, then showing the movie, and then afterwards explaining, you see now how this movie could be damaging, making you think that all these news sources are valid because you've bought into a fantasy where, yeah, journalists are trying to expose the story. Yeah, some of these agents are actually like really good people, and they'll, at the flip of a hat, they'll just turn around and become a good guy all of a sudden.
Mhm.
They just need one little push. They just need one little stroke of goodness, as it were. But the movie makes no pretense for, even though the main character is trying to do the right thing, it doesn't give any example of what the right thing would be, why the right thing would be the right thing, or why it's important to do the right thing. It's just
Mhm.
the main character decides he's going to do the right thing, and then he convinces other people to do the right thing, which is to kill people for a different governmental agency or something. I don't
Mhm.
know. So explaining those things out of it, that's the way I would go about displaying it. So then I would say the reason I picked that franchise is because then it encapsulates all these different concepts that are meant to tell you how the world works, but are actually just lies designed to manipulate you into buying into other media. So it's kind of like a building block. That's how I would bring it to my family. That's how I would explain it. And that's how I would prevent my family from falling into the trap of now reading newspapers every day and just reading into it. Oh, some CIA operation this, some CIA operation that.
Get somebody coming on Joe Rogan.
Yes.
Ex-CIA guy. Ex-CIA guy, as if that's something that even exists.
Yeah.
leaking all these things that they don't want to know about the aliens or something.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is a perfect example, is that if you kind of can explain the details and explain just the general concept, is that journalism has always been in bed with, the deep state
Yeah.
and all that kind of stuff, to where it always has been a propaganda arm that has always been what it is. And the entire idea of that hero journalist who is leaking the information that the government doesn't want you to know, is something that is entirely fabricated and entirely something that only comes from media, only comes from movies. Um, and that's something that you see borne out in what would be considered real life, which is, WikiLeaks, with the silver-haired guy that is somehow like the most wanted man and is just on some comical like balcony set, just doing his little press conferences while these governments really, really want him, but this one magical feat of barrier in the Ecuadorian embassy somehow keeps him alive. That if you really boil down all of the things that were found in the WikiLeaks stuff, is essentially the government or the military did bad things in the Middle East. They killed people that they probably shouldn't have, which is like, okay, wow, like this is not a surprise to anybody. And then like the Clinton email stuff, which is just more you look into it, the more it's just also just kind of an entirely fabricated event and story that is meant to create and curate a whole nother set of beliefs about the way that things are ran. So in that sense, that has been a useful tool in order to get people to think certain things about the world, of, oh, this guy is the most important journalist of the world. And there is a concept that is also talked about in Technology Belief, the book that we talked about a couple episodes ago, in that the standard mainstream media that you would think, because even on a normie level, they probably have, they have to be on the good side of the intelligence agencies, that you'd think that they would go against him, but they always do white mail for him. And that they always talked about with Julian Assange that he is, oh, say what you want about Julian Assange, but he has a 100% perfect journalistic record, and has never had to retract a single story. So in that sense, like they are promoting him, and they are promoting this idea that there is this rogue this rogue journalistic agency where if there is anything that would be valuable to be leaked, WikiLeaks would have gotten to it. So when the WikiLeaks guy is like, oh, nothing happened with 9/11.
Yeah.
Like, oh, everything was legit as it seemed. Then all of a sudden, it's just like, okay, well, I mean, obviously, I trust him. If anybody would know, he would know.
Yeah.
And then it also, the whole WikiLeaks thing also plays a valuable role in that anybody who would try to be leaking something are like, yo, I got these secret information about this thing that needs to get out there. I don't know where to go. I'm gonna go to WikiLeaks. Just effectively acting as sort of a honeypot for that kind of stuff. So in that sense, when you understand the role that something like WikiLeaks plays, it goes exactly into what you're talking about, the journalistic idea of the rogue person who's going to tell the truth that they don't want you to know, and really kind of dispels that idea. And when that idea is dispelled and you understand that there are not people that actually play that role, then it dispels so many other fabrications of the world. Because just going back into the idea of, if there was something that was supposed to be not known about, then of course it would be going out through one of these sources. But then when you realize that all of these sources are compromised, then the illusion that everything that would want to be known by the public but not known by the intelligence agencies would come out it completely dispels that idea, and then it's just like, okay, they can actually keep a secret.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest kind of lies is the idea that you can't keep a secret.
Mhm.
Well, clearly you can keep a secret. Secrets are kept very well. Um, not to speak out of both sides of our mouth, because we talked about in episode 4 how like blackmail doesn't work.
Mhm.
But that's specifically saying you can't keep a secret through that way. But you can keep secrets.
Mhm.
Just one other element that goes into the whole, like you mentioned, a certain email scandal. People might wonder, well, if they're all in the same team, why do they demonize some of themselves? Why are some of them such bad guys? And it really goes back to kind of one of the greatest Christian apologist arguments, which is, do you believe the devil is real?
Mhm.
People will go, oh, yeah, I believe in the devil. Well, then you must believe in God, right?
Mhm.
Oh, no, I don't believe in God. But you think about it, if devil's real, then God has to be real. Like, there
Mhm.
can't be a devil and no God. That just doesn't even make sense, right? So then you apply the same logic in the subconscious of people. They go, oh, there are certain people in government who are just horrible, horrible people, way worse than the rest of them, which implies that there are some good guys in government.
Mhm.
It implies that there's some white hats. There's somebody out there who's, shooting for the little guy. He's gunning for you. He's trying to do your thing,
Mhm.
and these people pop up all of the time. I don't want to be naming every political figure out there,
Mhm.
but you can fill in the blank with whoever you want that you think works for you,
Mhm.
and then find out they don't work for you.
Yeah.
This happens all the time in politics, and so it just goes into that feeder of, oh yeah, such and such people are really, really bad. We've got to get those people out of office because they're the bad people.
Mhm.
But the reality is they're all in the same team, and the reason they do that is so you will think that some of them are good.
Yeah, and this is the going back into something that I did a super secret stream on at one point after I got sick. It's just elaborating on the concept of hero worship, and that if you hold to the idea that you are looking for a hero, then Babylon will feed you a hero who says exactly the things that you want, does exactly the things that tickle your fancy, tickle
Mhm.
your ear. And then, there'll be some embarrassment, humiliation ritual that comes with that person of them having, something that delegitimizes them or puts them in a bad light. And you tied yourself so much to this hero, and now all of a sudden you get embarrassment because you championed this person. You talk to all your friends and family of like, yo, this guy knows the truth. And then all of a sudden something happens, and then it's like, oh, hey, that person that you said was the truth all of a sudden gets caught up in this scandal, and why are you doing this? So in that sense, I mean, obviously in an ideal world should have heroes.
Yes.
It should have people that can be in these roles to do genuinely great feats. But we don't live in a world where there can be those heroes, and it's so much easier to simply just fabricate a hero. Because also, where would you even hear about a hero? You would hear about a hero from the same sources that a hero would ostensibly be against. Like, oh, this person is super censored on TikTok and
Yeah.
Instagram and Spotify or something. Like, an example of something recently of how the media plays up the idea of censorship as a way to promote people.
Mhm.
You can look at Nick Fuentes, somebody who is banned on so many platforms and so many accounts, and it's like, oh, the media is so against him. But then, couple weeks ago or something, he gets unbanned on Spotify, and then all of a sudden becomes the number one podcast on Spotify, and then 2 days later gets banned. And then so that plays perfectly into not only the, oh, hey, this person is somebody who's very like popular and really important, really somebody who you need to be paying attention to, but then also playing into the sort of the victimization narrative of, oh, they don't want him to be talked about and be noticed. But running through that cycle of getting banned, getting unbanned, all of that stuff is actively creating events that play into that idea, into that narrative, and that if they did not want you to hear about somebody, you would not hear about them. It is very easy, especially with the more that social media sites go into algorithms, that uh, if somebody is not wanting to be talked about, then they will not be talked about. And
Mhm.
if they do want somebody to be talked about, they will be talked about. there is no way that you can be fighting the algorithms in this sense. It's too opaque, it's too powerful of a weapon. You are fighting on their grounds. Imagine if you're fighting a war on a classical, English war, the ones where there's lineups and stuff. And the enemy has the ultimate power to just change the terrain of the battlefield 24/7 every time. So every time you move from a position, it's like, oh, I got to go get the high ground. Then all of a sudden the high ground is like in a valley to where, you're perfectly surrounded by everybody. And the ground literally moves the soldiers to where they're all around you with perfect line of sight, perfect cover. That is exactly what happens with these algorithms. So in that sense, you cannot win a fight on a battlefield that you do not control.
I think that's really, really good way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to the hero thing,
mm-hmm.
there should be heroes. There are heroes, but there's a problem with our perception of reality.
Mm-hmm.
We think that everyone around us, I'm going to say it, I'm from a rural town.
Okay. New information.
And so everyone around me has some great thing they're good at. And because I know them all, I know the things they're good at. And there are certain guys who naturally emerge as kind of heroes, at least for a time, doing certain things. There's a particular guy who died fairly young around here. Not around here, but where I live, I should say. And he was a hero in his community because he did everything.
Mm-hmm.
Raised hunting dogs. He ran excavators. He had cows. He logged. He would do anything, and he helped everybody. That's a real hero. The guy was just like, he'd show up and he had boundless energy. He could do stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
Losing him was a huge blow to the community. I mean, just one of the biggest funerals I've ever been to in terms of people attending. And the point I bring that up is that when you are not in an area where you can appreciate the talents of the people around you, you look outside.
Mm-hmm.
And you look to media. You look to these Tony Starks or, Captain America. You go, that must be my hero. And because there's no one in the real world who's good enough, then you have to go to fiction and try to find somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality is, the way our society is connected, no one can be a hero because no one else is willing to be like, that guy's a hero. That's our guy from our town who's representing us or whatever. And instead, you get caught up in, I got to find my hero in Washington.
Mm-hmm.
I got to find my hero in the Senate or something like that.
I got to find my hero on Rumble.
Yes.
Yeah.
I got to find Tim Cook or something. I don't know.
Apple CEO.
Okay. Yeah, Apple CEO. Right. He's a hero, right? Because he saved Apple, right?
True,
he's a hero.
True. Yes.
You got to find your hero in the business world. And of course, you're never looking just around you. How many times have you just, put your phone or tablet down or whatever and just went outside and started talking to people and being like, what's your story? What are you doing? Well, we don't really do that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But instead, you're looking for your hero here. So you're going to find your hero here. You're never going to find your hero amongst real people. It's going to be some fake guy who shows up on a TV screen somewhere. And you'll be like, oh, wow. And that's what I mean when I say our perception of reality is wrong. Because we don't think that reality is around us. Reality is the screens. We perceive the world through these screens. And that's one reason I'm against all media in the sense that it's not just the movies. The movies are a problem. It's not just the TV shows. The TV shows are a problem. It's not just news media. That's a problem. YouTube, Instagram, all these different things build a world around you where you think the world is much bigger than it actually is. Because you can look through your special little scry glass and be like, oh, see, I can see this whole world. But can you touch it? Can you interact with it? Can you go talk to that person? I shook George Bush's hand.
Mm-hmm.
He's not real.
Yeah.
There's no ounce of reality between him and me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That might as well have been a nobody.
Mm-hmm.
But would I shake, my friend's hand? They're real because I can really depend on them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you need to find your heroes, and you can. Realistically and optimally, your father should be your hero. But we live in a world that robs this generation of that luxury because your father is demonized and he's so beat down that he can't get up again.
Mm-hmm.
And so it causes a generation that despises their fathers rather than idolizes them,
mm-hmm.
which is the hallmark of a strong society.
Yeah, because so much of media also just goes into the idea of the dumb doting father. Every sitcom has just the wife is the smart one,
Mhm.
and then the guy is not only just not dependable, he may be good at heart, and that's like the best trait that he could possibly have,
Yeah.
but ultimately just going to be incompetent, ultimately going to be fat, lazy slob, eating a beer and pizza after work, and just having the distended gut just all out there. And so in that sense, that's something that media plays into. And then media also plays into the idea that, the youngsters don't deserve anything, and that they're getting everything for free, and that they need to be on their own and find their own path. So on both sides of media, that people are being given, different movies on their screen, they're both designed, the purpose of them is to attack each side.
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of the media is to make the older generation hate the younger generation, and the younger generation hate the older generation. And that's always a good question of how do you view any piece of media, is trying to look at who is the intended audience, and then what is the ultimate message, ultimate idea that this is trying to convey. Recently, there are some people who are watching a Cartoon Network show with Elijah Wood. It's like Over the Garden Wall or something like that. I think that's the name. And the I saw half of it, and essentially what can be taken from that, like pretty much every other Cartoon Network show, and Cartoon Network is something that is designed for children slash young adults, even though it's all designed for children. At this point, it's a young adult thing, because young adults are being
still children,
brought into that childlike mentality for much longer and much more extended. So the media is reflecting that. So this piece of media, Over the Garden Wall, essentially is designed for the most spiritually vulnerable people in society, the losers, you could say. And it is designed to get them to be more open to interaction with fae or demons.
Yeah.
That is explicitly the purpose of what this is designed to do, is to sort of say, these literal entities that they're taking from European folklore of demons, of fae, and then putting them in the media of like, hey, maybe they're not that bad. And it's perfectly fine to be interacting with them. And then this is just like a normal thing. And
you got this. You're under control, even if you're interacting with these entities.
Yeah, you can totally interact with these literal demons and still get what you want. Still get out of it perfectly okay. And they're also, fairly innocent, fairly innocuous. They're not going to do too much harm to you. Or if they do try to do harm to you, you can totally, deal with it. So what that does is it just make it so we're like, oh yeah, I can perfectly interact with these entities just fine. And so understanding that, then if you come into it from that light, then you can have a scenario where it is safe to watch that if you explain all of these things in order to understand how this tool and how this weapon is being used against a specific type of person.
Yeah, I think just in kind of a generalized approach to media, if you're watching TV shows or movies, which I also understand that this is kind of an aside, it can be really difficult to come out of a home where you watched a lot of movies and then just stop watching movies. Mm-hmm. It's really otherworldly difficult how that is, and how society and the way you structured your life will draw you back into that. You think you can just, I just stop watching movies and TV shows. It's really difficult. But one of the aspects of it that you can use to kind of easily help yourself kind of sluice through things is understand that there is a truth that family is good. Mm-hmm. Being together is good. Literal distance of separation from family is bad. And when you come at it from that approach, if you say, okay, here, I'm going to watch all media now from the idea that the family is really good and the ultimate good is that the family sticks together,
Mhm.
then all of a sudden, so many movies, the main character's motivation just becomes selfish and dysgenic,
Mhm.
where this person is just evil.
Mhm.
Whereas if you eliminate that and you say, well, it's not really important for family to stick together and you do your own thing, you're your own person, then all the media seems okay. But if you can break your mind from the mold it was in and into the concept of, hey, family should stick together and family's good, and you shouldn't be disrespectful to your family members, then all of a sudden you can see all the flaws and you see that, oh, they're promoting a particular kind of thing. And the most common trope that occurs is the young person who wants to do this specific thing and the older generation basically not respecting them and being like, no, you'll never make it and it's a bad idea. And then the younger person goes and does the thing and like shows their mom or their dad, usually the dad, like, oh, you were wrong. And then basically there's no real reconciliation. It's just, haha, I was right.
Mhm.
And so when you look at that, you go, wow, that's just saying families are terrible and your family will always try to drag you down.
Mhm.
When instead we can change the script, change how our families operate and say, no, actually, our families can be supportive of each other. Maybe the fact that you want to do this thing that's 2,000 miles away from the rest of your family, maybe that's selfish.
Mhm.
Maybe your dream, as it were, is misplaced. Maybe you need to change the way you view the world and put your family first. This is something that is really dangerous to young people. They think, I need to go on a huge adventure. I need to be on my own. I need to face these things alone. Um, and that's just not true. You just don't need to do that. It's not essential. You don't need to have your own little out there on my own story arc. You can just be with your family. Then once you accept that, then all the movies start to lose a lot of their potency.
And that's where you can use your own weapons, where you have things that can be used as tools to make something be not what you would want somebody to look at as good or look at as bad. And an example right here would be disgust, to where if you show examples and you have ultimate foundational principles of what is good, like family, when you have that as something that is very steadfast and very confident that you have, whenever you do expose somebody to pieces of media that do glorify going away from your family and just entirely taking selfish motivations that barely have a 2% benefit on your own personal life, but at a 100% loss to your family life, it will invoke a disgust reaction and make it to where, oh, this is something that is so grotesque that I don't want to watch it. In the same way that I'm very squeamish about gore. I don't like gore. I don't like horror. These things make me feel very uncomfortable. I am a little dainty, sensitive young man who cannot deal with those kind of things. And the responses that you have to moral gore can be the exact same thing when you have these strong foundational ideas and then also understanding, making the logical connection to how this is moral gore. Because if you don't understand how something can be moral gore, then you won't be able to make that connection on a primitive level. When you see literal, blood and guts, very obvious, very visceral, very like primitive in the pit of your stomach. Whereas for a lot of these more insidious moral things that are baked into media in a clandestine fashion, that's something that needs a little bit more direction to understand, oh, hey, this is glorifying the worst possible morality and trying to make people do the worst thing possible.
And in that regard, I think it's important that if you are, like us, really against the media, you should have a pretty valid reason for it. For me, my suspicion was aroused more or less by the fact that I'm a devout Christian, and I kind of initially fell into the same trap that a lot of people fall into of, oh, it's just new media that's bad. Old media was good. Um, But I really wanted to figure out what's going on here. Why is it that it always seems to be getting worse? And in doing so, everything I found all the way back from the beginning is like, this was always the end goal, was to get to this point. So if you are against it, it's important to understand why you're against it. What is it that you would be okay with? I grew up in a house where we kind of understood theater to be a bad thing, even though I ended up doing some theatrics and things of that nature. In general, we're kind of like, oh yeah, it's a bad thing. And that was something that quite literally came from my great grandparents back when they went to a theater show and they were like, this is really bad. And it just generationally made its way down to, hey, this is bad because it goes against the morals and the concepts. And that's really the whole point, is why would you fill your mind? When I say fill, I do mean fill your mind with these things that are antithetical to your actual belief in what is the right thing to do. You are poisoning yourself. And so when you're eliminating media, you need to understand there's kind of different thresholds of getting it out of your system, being able to criticize it, being able to look back and say, oh yeah, that actually wasn't good for me that I was watching that thing, or that I was engrossed in that TV show. It wasn't a helpful thing. And then there is kind of the final analysis of, okay, what is it important that I showcase to my children that they don't fall for the same traps that I fell? If someone had been guiding me, maybe I wouldn't have given over so much of my thought and so much of my belief to these concepts and have to do so much unlearning of them. Which kind of goes into some of the other things that we were going to talk about, just regards to how to direct your thoughts and how to give your energy and your time to really, really good things. We have, if you're Christian, you have a direct order to think about good things. Whatever is lovely, you think on those things. And really, that's kind of the basis for a lot of how I order my life now. Is it beautiful? Is it edifying? And one of the things that we've talked about a lot is going after knowledge always a good thing? Is knowledge itself a reason to do something?
Which is something that's talked about in media so often. Of I mean, half of the stories that are talked about as, oh, super cool things like, oh, Matrix or the Lego movie are literally just the story of Genesis, but the snake is a good guy.
Yeah.
To where, oh, like, it is always good to have knowledge, absolutely. But, like, really, there are many things that I wish that I had just never seen.
Yeah.
And there is no benefit that I had to being exposed to these things. And this is something that goes just overall in general, that there are things that will poison you. There are things that will pollute your mind. Like, I will look on a cursory level of the occult influences in the modern world, but I am very careful about how much I look into that stuff, because I know how much that can poison you, how much that can completely one-shot you. And if I really wanted to understand occult stuff, I would do, DMT and ayahuasca and all of these things that I know will not be beneficial to me to know these things. I can just take people's words on what the little machine elves, DMT machine elves say, as opposed to actually having that personal experience myself. Because once I am exposed to that, I can never unexpose myself to that. And every piece of media is something that hurts you. And it can hurt you in the way that doing workouts and building muscles can hurt you, to where, you are going to be stronger for it. And there's also things that can hurt you in a way that gives you scar tissue. And so you have to be just very deliberate, very careful about, even if you want to expose your children to negative media, that you don't want to go too extreme with it.
Yeah.
And still just going back into the idea of that ultimately when you're doing it, you don't want to just uh, let them be in their own room, isolated, looking at these things with no direction or vision, because ultimately it is your responsibility for what your child intakes physically, mentally, spiritually. That is something that you have as a responsibility. And so putting them to the beasts, letting the algorithm decide what is being shown to your children is abdicating your own responsibility. And everything that happens because of that is your fault. And so if, they watch an Undertale edit in 2016 and then go down the rabbit hole of being super weird furries or something, that is something that you directly caused if you gave them, unfettered access to the internet.
Yeah, I think one of the big dangers. I keep saying this, but there's a lot of big dangers. So I'm just saying, one of the big dangers is like YouTube Kids.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that when media was brought up in maybe 2012, 2016, it became a really big hot topic. Oh, tablets are being a thing. What should kids really be watching? And the onus, universally, the responsibility was given to companies like YouTube and Netflix, that
Mhm.
they needed to cater their things and have a kids section.
Mhm.
And this just blows my mind how many parents just went, awesome, finally.
Yeah.
And then they're just like, okay, kids, you can watch anything on Netflix, kids, anything on YouTube, kids. And if you have done any research into those two, that's the most degenerate, most sexually suggestive content of
Mhm.
basically anything.
Mhm.
And that is exactly what we're talking about here, abdicating your responsibility, going, yeah, you know what? The responsibility is actually on Netflix to determine what my kids can and cannot watch, or
Mhm.
YouTube or something like that. And then you just let it go. It's like, no, that's on you. You are actively allowing this thing to happen. And so I would say that's the worst. And it kind of follows because you went to media and you said, oh, great media. Oh, great wise media. Can you get together some programming just for my little child?
Mhm.
Stuff that you would like my kid to watch.
Yeah.
And I'll give give that to them. Are you surprised that they literally gave the most harmful, most destructive stuff that possibly could be to your kids when that was their stated intention all along?
Yeah, you're asking Babylon for a hero,
Yeah.
and then you're giving it to them in the same way that uh, the same people who will look at degenerate content and look at all this propaganda that's coming out of Netflix will give their kids Netflix Kids, because all of
Yeah.
a sudden it's like, Netflix is evil and woke or something, but they only start with teenager stuff.
Right.
They would never propagandize my kids.
Never.
But yeah, which goes back into, if you ask Babylon for a hero, Babylon will provide you a hero.
Yeah.
If you ask Babylon to give your children something from the kingdom of Medea, then they will give you stuff from the kingdom of Medea.
Yes.
That is exactly the kind of thing that they would curate. And this also wraps around to the idea of public school, in that so many people will complain about what is going on in the curriculum of public school. But as soon as you put your kid in public school, that is anything that they teach is something that is your responsibility. You chose to make that happen to where your kids were exposed to that. And in that sense, you can't complain at all about what actually is going on there in a justifiable fashion, because you are the one that put them into that situation. That was Nobody forced you to do that.
No, that's the wild thing to me too, is people go to the system that is doing the thing that they don't like and ask the system to change. And this has historically never worked.
Mhm.
You can't go to an established system that you have realistically no control over and ask them to change.
Mhm.
They are producing their product, and you can either buy it or not.
Mhm.
And in the case of public school, you're buying it with your children's time and your time, because a lot of people say, oh, I put my kids in school because then I have more free time or whatever, some silly thing like that.
Mhm.
Or, oh, I don't have time to raise my kids, or all these different things. The reality is you are buying a product. And you can complain about the product all you want, but as long as you keep buying the product, you're still responsible for the outcome. It's kind of like buying rat poison and feeding it to your kids, and then going to the rat poison company and being like, "You've got to stop producing poisonous things. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why don't you produce healthy things?" They sell rat poison. That's what they do. Education sells poison. The education system is set up to poison the children against their families. You shouldn't be surprised when that's exactly what happens.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that causes the idea of generational thinking, which is that people are not raised by their grandparents. People are not raised by their family and their parents. So there's a massive cultural disconnect that happens to where, the things that were taught in school at one point are not the same things that are taught in school now. And so there's completely different cultures with different thoughts, and people can't even communicate with their grandparents anymore because they effectively speak different languages,
Mm-hmm.
because they're being taught by their peers, which would never have been a classical thing that is done. um, People demonize their grandparents demonize their children, to where they have $10 million in their account, and their children are struggling to afford a home and just not doing anything to that. And then so, when their grandparents get old enough, they go into a nursing home. And instead of having them be, giving daycare when it's needed, like, oh, if you actually have to do something, you have to go out of the house, instead of paying some random minimum wage worker, you can instead have the grandparents do it, because the grandparents would also love to do that, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and so with that, there's so much more to go into media overall, but this is just a little kind of palette understanding, a framework to understand why we may be so much more anti-media, or what the relationship would be like for media that we would consider. And this is something that is actually worth paying attention to, because it's very easy to just go the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is to essentially just do what is being told of you, because it takes a lot of calories, a lot of effort to do these things, and to, instead of just watching a movie, it's having, hour talk preamble about it, and then an hour, 2 hours of talk after the movie, that require a lot of deep introspection and deep thought. And these things are very difficult. These things take a lot of energy. It's very hard to do what we're trying to say in giving proper shields, proper protection for you and your children from the evils of media. But everything in life that's worth doing is hard. And so with that, it's been real.
It's been real.